Hello, this is Eric Michael Lloyd, I have a master's in clinical psychology, neuropsychology concentration. Going to continue reading the book by Dean Radin. Dean Radin, PhD, Real Magic. Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, and a Guide to the Secret Power of the Universe. Many of these are parapsychology topic areas. Not quite as known as the research on psychology or clinical psychology or any other domain like developmental, cognitive, or child forensic, neuropsychology, things like that. Cryptochrome is where I left off. The chocolate experiment provided intriguing results, but it would have been more impressive if we had found an objective outcome associated with the blessing. To explore this idea, Professor Young John Chai from the National Kaohsiung Normal University in Taiwan ran an experiment to see if blessed water would influence the growth of seeds. Dr. Shaya asked if I would like to collaborate on the project, and I was glad to assist. For the seeds, Shaya chose a small flowering weed in the mustard family called Arabidopsis thaliana. Its common name is mouse ear cress. The full genome of this plant was completely sequenced in the year 2000, and shortly afterward, the human genome was also sequenced. It was then discovered that a majority of genes suspected to play a role in human disease had close analogs in Arabidopsis. That made this little plant, which grows quickly and easily in the laboratory, a key resource in the study of the genetics of both plant and human health. Arabidopsis also contains a photosensitive protein called cryptochrome. This protein plays an important role in many aspects of plant growth, including circadian rhythm, flowering time, and seed germination. Of interest to us was the fact that cryptochrome is found in both plants and humans, and that there is evidence that cryptochrome has quantum properties. Among other things, the quantum nature of this protein is thought to account for cryptochrome's exquisite sensitivity to weak magnetic fields. Cryptochrome is found in the retina of certain birds, which apparently allows the birds to literally see the Earth's magnetic lines of force. Shaya speculated that because Arabidopsis contains cryptochrome, it is a potential living quantum system. That is, it might act as a supersensitive target for use in an intention experiment. The water used to hydrate the Arabidopsis seeds was purchased from a commercial water boiling plant in Taiwan. 24 bottles were used in the study. They were randomly assigned by a third party into blessed and untreated conditions, and then labeled A or B. The intentional treatment itself was provided by Master Lu Chen, a respected monk and director of the Bliss and Wisdom Buddhist Foundation in Taiwan, along with 2 senior monks from the same foundation. The intention they provided was similar to the chocolate experiment. The Arabidopsis that absorbs this water will manifest optimal growth. In particular, it will have increased nutrition, energy, vigor, and well-being. The monks mentally directed this blessing toward half of the bottles of water in a room at the foundation for 20 minutes. Then, to avoid accidentally influencing the control bottles of water, which were located in the same room, as the treated bottles, they added, "This enhancement," referring to the blessed bottles, "is only for this batch of water." During this procedure, only a research assistant and the 3 monks were present, and none of them was involved in any other aspect of the experiment. Also, none of the other participants or investigators in the study knew which bottles were blessed or in the control group, maintaining the strict double-blind design. After the intentional treatment process, a third party, who was blinded to the meaning of the labels A and B on the bottles, was in charge of all the watering, seed germination, and measurement procedures. After all the measurements were completely analyzed, only then was the blinding code broken. We used 3 types of Arabidopsis seeds. One was called the wild type, which means the seed found in the wild. It's known as Columbia 4. The second seed was loss of function, mutation, meaning its genetic makeup made it less sensitive to blue light than the wild type. The third seed was a gain of function mutation, which has enhanced sensitivity to blue light. All of the seeds were prepared in the usual way for laboratory growth and then placed in a temperature-controlled incubator. Some seeds were hydrated with blessed water, others with the untreated water. The dishes of seeds were distributed randomly within the incubators. In each experiment, 3 measurements were taken on the germinated seedlings: the amount of chlorophyll, a green pigment, the amount of anthocyanin, a red-orange to blue-violet pigment, and hypocotyl length, the stem of a seedling. In increased levels of chlorophyll and anthocyanin are known to be beneficial for human health, and a shorter stem length is associated with improved seed growth. Based on these properties, we predicted that seeds grown with blessed water would show increased levels of chlorophyll and anthocyanin, and a shorter hypocotyl length as compared to seeds with the control water. And that's what we observed. The average hypocotyl length in seedlings hydrated with the blessed water was much shorter than seedlings hydrated with control water. This enhancement occurred mainly in seeds with the gain of function mutation. See Figure 2. The experiment was repeated 4 times, each using different intensities and combinations of blue and red light to see how the plants would respond to different energies. And overall, the effect was a robust demonstration of the force of will. Over the 4 experiments, the difference in seedling stem length was associated with odds chance of 38 trillion to 1. Significant increases in anthocyanin and chlorophyll were also observed in the gain of function mutations, the former with odds chance of 33,000 to 1, and the latter at a more modest 20 to 1. This study showed that force of will produced objectively measurable changes in plant growth. Precisely how this works is not yet known, but this experiment and the earlier study involving chocolate suggests that blessing food and beverages does more than just provide a feel-good ritual. It may also add intangible new spice, magic. Setting future goals. According to magical lore, one way to manifest a goal through force of will is to affirm that the goal has already been accomplished. This means placing the goal in the future with your imagination, and then letting present time events catch up to the future goal. This sounds crazy, but it's a testable idea that provides an example of how science can help advance our understanding of the mechanisms of magic. They went over the definition of magic in one of the previous pages. Should probably go over that as well. Of course, they mean it in the scientific sense. Measurable, objective, concise, um, operational definitions which have hypotheses that are tested based on those research analysis as well. The experiment we'll look at can be described via a baseball metaphor. Say you're watching a pitcher throw a curveball toward the plate. Over the 60-foot, 6-inch distance from the pitcher's mound to the plate, a curveball can deviate from the center line as much as 17 inches. Now imagine that you've been watching the pitcher throw a couple dozen curveballs, and the deviations are all roughly in the same range, about 1.5 feet. And then the pitcher winds up for another throw and fires one towards the plate. But this time, the ball curves 8 feet from the plate. You blink in astonishment, and the hot dog you've been chewing, falls out of your open mouth. The umpire faints. The catcher stares at the ball careening sideways off into the distance. Then you turn to your friend to see if they just saw what you did. And they too are standing with mouths agape. This is impossible. There was no blast of wind or other mundane reasons that might have caused the ball to behave that way. And no human can spin the ball fast enough to make it curve from the center line by 8 feet. And yet it did. This metaphor is roughly what happens in successful experiments involving mind-matter interaction. The outcomes appear to be impossible. The only force in physics that's clearly associated with mental activity is electromagnetism, generated by neuronal activity in the brain. But that force is so weak that at the surface of the scalp, it's measured in microvolts, millionths of a volt. That minuscule force is exceptionally difficult to detect just a few feet away from the scalp. So electromagnetism is a very unlikely explanation for the effect of intention on the physical world. Then how else might it work? What if the pitcher intensely imagined that the ball was curving, and the act of intention itself caused the metaphorical equivalent of a gravitational attraction? So what if the pitcher intensely imagined that the ball was curving, and the act of intention itself caused the metaphorical equivalent of a gravitational attraction? As mentioned earlier, Einstein's theory of general relativity describes gravity as a distortion in the fabric of space-time caused by the presence of mass. Gravity is the distortion of fabric. Yeah, that's right. Okay. I'm reminded of the idea of a bowling ball in the middle of a waterbed or something to that effect. That would be the net or the ether to which the planets lie on. Have you ever seen one of those things where you drop a penny or a dime into one of those circular kind of games and coin collectors? The ball always rotates toward the center till it goes fast enough, and then it goes straight to the bottom. That's the idea of Einstein's space-time. But then it also has to do with time and how it's equated with time as well. So that's just one aspect of it. If such a distortion introduced, in this case, by focused attention, was able to bend space between the pitcher and the plate, then the ball would naturally follow that bend. To a casual observer, the ball's movement might look like a force had shoved it, but no explicit force need be involved. From a conventional physics perspective, linking intention with gravitational spacetime warps is of course outrageous. But when considering impossible outcomes, we're obliged to consider all sorts of radical possibilities. The point of the metaphor is to play with the idea that maybe intention warps something about space-time, because if that were indeed the case, then intention could make all sorts of surprising things happen. The beautiful thing about science is that we don't need to engage in endless debates about the merits or demerits of such wild speculations. Even the strangest ideas can be put to the test. So that's what we did. In our experiment, a tossed curveball was modeled by a mathematical structure known as a Markov chain. This technique, named after the early 20th century Russian mathematician Andreyevich Markov, is used to model systems that evolve over time, such as the incremental positions of a ball thrown from the pitcher's mound to the plate. Each successive event in this sequence of events depends on the previous event according to a set of probabilistic rules. In our case, the probability is determined if the tossed ball continues on a straight line defined as 80% of the time in our experiment, or gets nudged to one side or to the other 20% of the time. By design, when the ball reaches the plate, it will end up either a little to the left or a little to the right of the center line. We won't let it land exactly in the center. The probabilities in our experiment were generated by a truly random number generator, and the goal was to see if force of will could cause a simulated ball to curve in the intended direction. The experiment. If you were a participant in this study, you wouldn't know anything about the baseball metaphor. I'd ask you to press a button while maintaining the intention to hear an engaging audio clip selected randomly from a pool of 500 possible clips. Each of these clips is just a few seconds long. They're famous spoken lines or other snippets extracted from soundtracks of popular television shows, movies, and news reports. An example is the spoken phrase, "I have a dream," from the famous speech by Martin Luther King. Once the button is pressed, you would immediately hear either a randomly selected audio clip or a short click sound. Your goal is to get the interesting audio clip each time you press the button. You repeat this task 100 times, and then you're finished. Each trial takes about 5 seconds, so the experiment is fast and easy. This experiment design guarantees that if intention has no influence on the virtual ball, then it would curve according to chance expectation, about 50 times to the left and 50 times to the right. But if intention does influence the ball, then it would curve more in one direction than one would expect by chance. Recall that we're not talking about baseballs. The experiment used a computer program and a random number generator to model a pitched ball. What is actually going on is straightforward but more abstract than baseball. When you press the button to initiate each trial, a random number generator generates a random bit, like a coin flip, either a 1 or a 0. If the bit is 1, that is assigned in the direction left, and if it is a 0, it is assigned right. That decision takes place in the P bubble, P for picture, at the bottom of figure 3. I'll show that figure as well in the book, as data is always important. This decision indicates the way the simulated ball is spinning as it leaves the simulated pitcher's hand. Because the RNG outcome is completely random, each time we press the button to begin a trial, we'll end up in the stage 1 left bubble about half the time, and in the stage 1 right bubble about half the time. Once we're at stage 1, the random number generator generates a random number from 1 to 100. So once we're at stage 1, once we're at the stage 1 right bubble, once we're at stage 1, the random number generator generates a random number from 1 to 100. If the resulting number is between 1 and 80, and we were in the left bubble, then we'll continue straight ahead to move to the left bubble at stage 2. If the number is greater than 80, then we'll switch to the right bubble. We repeat the same process at stage 2 to advance to stage 3. Each trial in this experiment consists of 3 jumps, each associated with whether the virtual ball curves left or curves right as it moves from the initial P decision to stage 3. If at stage 3 the ball ends up in the left bubble, then the interesting audio clip is played. If it ends up in the right bubble, then the uninteresting click sound is played. In the actual experiment, this 3-step process is completed in a fraction of a second. So you get an audio clip or a click almost instantly after pressing the button. Before we conducted this experiment, we tested the setup to see if it was biased in some way that might inadvertently cause the virtual ball to drift to the left or right. To do this, we automatically ran it through thousands of trials while no one was paying attention. For each trial, we had the computer count how many times the virtual ball ended up in the left and right bubbles at each of the 3 stages. The hit rate at each stage was the count divided by the number of trials, the average. Not surprisingly, because all of the random decisions were made with a truly random number generator, and no one was applying intention, we found that the hit rates at stages 1, 2, and 3 were all about the same. Very close to 50%. That's again, the hit rates at stages 1, 2, and 3 were all close to 50%. So the system was working as expected. What happened when the participants intentionally tried to influence the random number generator? So I think about this random number generator when it comes to things like the IAT, or implicit aptitude test, attitude test, which has to do with implicit bias and things like that, which all people do have. But I think about those effects as perhaps maybe a correcting mechanism for our human error, which everyone has. There are good biases, there are good preferences, and there are not so good unadaptive, maladaptive preferences or biases, which can turn into stereotypes if they're made about groups of people and they have to do with behaviors, and then which turns to the next thing, which is racist behavior, which is overt stereotypes about large groups of people based on bias. And that's, I think, intro to psychology, or one of the psychologies, social psychology, I think. That's those things. Results. Figure 4 shows 3 lines. See page 118. The one labeled Stage 1 shows the proportion of time that the virtual ball landed in the left versus the right bubble at Stage 1. After each of the 100 repeated trials, remember, each trial consisted of one full pass through the Markov chain. The Stage 1 line indicates that after the first couple of trials, the ball tended to drift toward the right bubble. In the graph, this is shown as below the 50% line. By the 25th trial, it was drifting toward the left bubble, about above the 50% line. And then after about the 14th trial, the 40th trial, it stayed right about 50%, meaning about half the time drifting left and half the time drifting to the right with no clear preference. So far, so good. Nothing unusual happening. So it looks like the results go on for another 4 or 5 pages here. I'll read the next video and link these 2 videos together so you can get all of the results in the chapter on scientific evidence for Dean Radin's PhD on the parapsychological phenomena and psi research. The book is called Real Magic. Thank you. And then I'll continue reading the rest of the chapter, which is about 50 more pages. Thank you.